Good afternoon, everybody. Marton and Charlie Black here for a special Flock Talk 2021 Pod season preview. Of course, the Pod season is presented by Shaw, so a huge thanks to them for helping us get underway amidst some interesting circumstances. But
is that
Charlie,
the word we're going with? Interesting?
We're going to go with interesting, but we're finally playing. It is happening. The BCHL has gotten the go-ahead. The Surrey Eagles season will start on Friday, April 2nd against the Coquitlam Express. But before we go into that, we want to talk about what had happened since the last time the Eagles played on November 7th against the Langley Rivermen. That was the last preseason game played by the team. There have been some roster moves all over the league. We are going to focus in on the Burnaby Pod, which is being hosted by the Express in 8 rinks, the Scotia Barn, as it is now called. But Charlie, before we get into all of that, how are you doing on this great afternoon?
Well, I'm pretty decent. No complaints. It's a nice day out. So, having fun.
Nice day to chat some hockey, and the first thing we're going to talk about here, we're going to go over the way that the 3 teams roster looks. So the Burnaby Pod, for anybody who is just finding out about the season or just tuning in for the first time, it is the Surrey Eagles, the Coquitlam Express, and the Powell River Kings, who are going to play 20 games in the span of about 40 days against each other for each of these teams. And we'll start with the Eagles. That's the team that we're covering. It's the team that we're going to be cheering for. Yes, I am a little biased.
Aren't we all?
This Eagles team looks very strong going into this pod season.
You've got a lot of returning players, especially from the November roster where things left off, and especially also from last year's roster from the first round of the playoffs that beat Chilliwack. You have a ton of returning pieces coming back to make an impact. Christian Fitzgerald, Tommy Scarfoni. I mean, the list goes on and on. You've lost some big impact pieces like Carter King, who has graduated to the NCAA, but at the same time, you're filling a lot of those pieces, some good acquisitions down the pipeline. At the trade deadline, the Eagles have acquired Will Kushnirik, a big-bodied 20-year-old winger from the Prince George Spruce Kings, also got some WHL experience. We're going to look at a brand-new dynamic duo coming in, the Eagles acquiring Tyson McLean and Jacob Pillar from the Portage Terriers in the Manitoba Junior League, whose season, of course, shut down entirely. So they're looking to bring in a lot of that scoring punch and that top-line power that we might have expected out of Cole Galata and Mark Hillier, now playing in Summerside.
And I mean, with these new acquisitions, they don't even have to be those first-line players because this Eagles roster has an abundance of high-impact forwards in this league. You look at Holden Katzele, you look at Christian Fitzgerald, you look at Michael Abgral, you look at Gabe Skovanik, Brandon Sanawana. The list kind of goes on and on here when you're talking about this team. But let's not overlook the fact, one, the Surrey Eagles are going into this with the best goaltender in this pod. And I don't think that's a debate. Tommy Scarfoni, fresh off of his NCAA Division I commit for RIT, is going to look to kind of stand on his head like he did all last season and through the playoffs. And then on defense, you've got Kieran O'Hearn, the captain, freshly with his commit to Yale University. You've got the 2 Tater Tots and Tate Ross and Tate Taylor, 2 16-year-old defensemen who are looking to make big strides this pod season.
2 words, Jimmy Darby.
And Jimmy Darby, of course, one of the returning defensemen from last season, big-bodied defenseman. He's going to play a physical presence there, especially inside the Scotia Barn. And it just makes for a well-rounded team that it's going to be tough for Coquitlam and Powell River to figure out.
Absolutely. You're looking at just how much power you're rolling with from last season, from the exhibition season. There's so much carryover. And I think with a lot of these rosters, like Coquitlam and Powell River especially, who've had to restock the cupboards, basically, they were heavily hit by a lot of the team players bolting to teams in the States and elsewhere to find opportunities. They've had to bring in a lot of support, not looking at a lot of returnees, especially if you take a look at Coquitlam's roster. They have 4 returning players, 5 if you include Tyler Schleppe, who played there last year but is on loan from the Langley Rivermen, opting out of this pod season.
And when you look at the Coquitlam Expresses we're now going to look to, the first thing that I noticed when I looked at that roster is who is going to be your star, who is going to be your impact player that's going to help get you over the hump in games against Powell River and against Surrey. And you're looking at Tyler Schleppe, you're looking at Danny Pearson, you're looking at these names and you're hoping that they can take the next step. Because Coquitlam, they traded away Massimo Rizzo to Chilliwack in the preseason for Arlo Merritt, who then went to the USHL, which is it's the unfortunate part of what had happened during the December exodus, as we'll call it, with all these teams losing all these players because they all, in their right, with their right, had to go and find opportunities. And it sucks. The Eagles lost a lot of players. I know Chilliwack lost a lot of players. Coquitlam lost a lot of players. Powell River lost a lot of players. But it's going to be tough for them, especially because for Cam Keith's Surrey squad, they were able to retain a lot of their players that they were looking forward already to kind of build and to play. And now I do worry about Powell River and Coquitlam and where their scoring is going to come from.
You're also going to look at the coaching. Since the end of last season's playoffs, Coquitlam has changed coaches twice. Powell River has also changed coaches. So we're going into this pod season keeping in mind as well, Powell River didn't get to play any exhibition games whatsoever before the extended restrictions shut down any hopes of them having any exhibition matches against the Cowichan Valley Capitals. So this is going to be the first go-around for Brock Sawyer and his Powell River Kings. This is going to be the first go-around for Adam Nugent-Hopkins and his Coquitlam Express. Cam Keith, Brad Tobin, they've been on the Eagles bench since last year. They're going to keep a lot of that continuity. That's kind of my word of the day, is continuity. And that's going to be a huge factor as to why the Eagles are going to be, I think, one of the biggest stories of the pod season. Not just the Burnaby Pod, but the BCHL season presented by Shaw in its entirety. I think a lot of people are going to be sleeping on the Eagles and don't expect us to make some noise.
Well, and there are always going to be your top teams in every pod. Like, you have to look at Penticton being the favorite in their pod. You've got to look at Chilliwack being the favorite in their pod.
Nanaimo Victoria is going to be a big race.
And then you've got Trail, Cranbrook, and
Penticton.
Penticton's in that pod. Oh, that's right. Pardon me. So in the other pod, I would think maybe West Kelowna, maybe Vernon. Vernon is another team that you
never
can look
count
at.
out Salmon Arm. I think that Vernon pod's going to be very competitive.
Yeah, but in this Surrey pod, the big thing is that the Eagles did not have to go and build a brand new roster. They had 20 players that were around, and then they were able to add those pieces. They were able to add the Jacob Pillars. They were able to get back the White Rock native Jacob Slipik from Powell River, who is now going to be playing his former team. And, Michael Abgro will play his former team as well, but a player who will play his former team as well, Adamo Santia, the former Surrey Eagle, and he is going to need to be a big piece for that Powell River team.
On the Eagles, Adamo Santia was looked to provide a lot of that grit, a lot of that bottom six solidity, and just be able to pitch in a little bit of offense, but primarily be there to make some room. I'm very curious and intrigued to see how Powell River is going to utilize his skill set. We saw a little bit of that offensive flash early on last season from Santia. It petered off a little bit as his role changed and adjusted. So I'm very much looking forward to what Powell River is going to have him do, how they're going to look to him to lead a lot of this relatively young club, a lot of junior B players, a lot of academy players. Powell River stocking the cupboards here, they're going to have a new roster, and they're going to be looking to a lot of that leadership. Nick Porchetta is going to be looked upon to lead a lot of the way offensively. There's a lot that we're going to look at here. And Powell River is a lot more of a wild card because we haven't seen them yet this season. Not since the last time we saw Powell River play a game, Derek Kroll was in net. That's how long ago. And that's a much different roster now than it was then.
Well, and that's, I think, the biggest, you were right, it is the biggest wild card because Coquitlam looked pretty good in the preseason, and then they lost a lot of players. And that took a lot of their star power, and it took a lot of their sting. But Powell River, we have no idea. We have no idea what system they're going to play. We have no idea how they're going to want their team identity to look. They're going to give a lot of different options that, it's going to be an adjustment for Cam Keith and the Eagles to get used to that. But I do think that the Eagles, they have the goaltending and they have the up front, like the forward depth in order to, I'm not going to say run away with, but they look to be the favorites in this pod to win a lot of their games. And that's going to take us to our pod predictions here on Flock Talk this season previewing. Charlie, I'm going to let you go first here. What are you predicting happens in this pod season?
I think with how familiar we're going to get, these games have an opportunity to get very chippy very quickly. Discipline is going to be a major factor, especially when you're looking at these two teams and you don't exactly know where they're going to be coming from. Having Brock Sawyer and Adam Nugent-Hopkins introduce their new clubs to a Surrey Eagles team that's very solid, I think you have a chance of seeing some animosity bubble up very quickly, and it's going to be on the Eagles to kind of keep a lid on things and be able to control the pace. I think we're going to see a hot Eagles team out of the gate as Coquitlam and Powell River adjust. And as they adjust, it'll be quick. There's going to be no room for error. There's going to be no room to hem and haw. It's going to be, you won last night, what are you going to do? You lost last night, what are you going to do? It's going to be a lot of snap decisions. So I'm predicting you come out hot, I think the other teams catch up, and you have to maintain that same momentum. It's very easy to say that the Eagles could run away with this pod, but I think we're going to see some competitive games down the stretch, and I'm predicting Surrey atop the group, Coquitlam close behind, Powell River not too far off either. 1, 2, 3, that's my prediction.
I'm going to go the same order of the prediction. I think that Coquitlam kind of having some returning Junior A players who have produced, who have experience as offensive weapons in this league, I think that gives them the edge over the wild card that is the Powell River Kings, because we do not know how those Powell River Kings players are going to fare in a tougher environment, playing against better competition than maybe what a lot of those players have been used to playing. They're going to have to make a big jump. I'm a little bit more on the side of that the Eagles are going to come out strong and they're not going to fade. This is a team right now that has enough forward depth that I don't know if these two teams are going to be able to keep up with the Teo Daddario, Holden Cardinal line. That might be the Eagles' third or fourth line. We don't know, but when Teo was in preseason and those 6 games versus Chilliwack, he looked very good as well. I'm going to say that Surrey will run away with this. I think they're going to get 14 wins on the pod season. I do think that Chilliwack and Powell River will play about 500 hockey against each other. I do think Coquitlam is going to edge out Powell River, but I see Surrey kind of not going to run away with this, but they're going to be comfortable at the top.
We're going to be playing Chilliwack?
Well, pardon me, Coquitlam. Coquitlam and Powell River. Man, I am all over the place. But that is it for this 2021 pod season preview. We want to thank everybody for tuning in, and a huge thanks to Shaw for helping the BCHL season get off and running. Of course, it is presented by Shaw. Marton and Charlie Black, we will try and give you weekly updates for Flock Talk as the pod season is going on. And remember, first game is going to be Friday, April 2nd. It's going to be the Surrey Eagles going up against the Coquitlam Express. You can catch that broadcast live on BCHL TV, powered by Hockey TV, and on Mixler.com/EaglesBCHL.
It's at 6:30 p.m. Pacific.